Hello everyone, I'm Joseph and I've got another PDH deck tech for you today. This week, we've got the Orzhov guild with white and black, and today's commander is a little different with Shadewing Laureate. Shadewing Laureate is a 2/2 human warlock for a white, Orzhov, and a black with flying, and whenever another creature you control with flying dies, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. So this commander interested me because it's flying tribal, but in black and white, not blue and white. Now, true to Orzhov fashion, it cares about creatures dying. Specifically, flying creatures dying. And in return, we get a payoff of +1 counters on any creature we control. So, what is the goal of this deck? We're going to utilize a disposable swarm of flyers to overwhelm our opponents, and we're going to take advantage of their deaths and those +1 counters they produce. So, first off, we have a lot of small cheap flyers, such as Battlefield Raptor, Morning Throw, and Fetid Imp. We can get these out early and use them either for swinging or for blockers. All of these creatures have effective keywords, Battlefield Raptor having First Strike, Morning Throw having Lifelink, and Fetid Imp having Pay a Black, get Death Touch until end of turn. And those are in addition to their flying, meaning that they'll get more and more effective as they grow in power. Now, in addition to these cheap flyers, we are going to also produce token flying creatures. So we've got Bechon Apparition, an instant for an Orzhov that has exile target card from a graveyard, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. So this is a cheap way to get an emergency blocker, but is also versatile because it can serve as a key piece of graveyard hate. In addition, we've got Soul of Migration, a 2/4 elemental for 5 white that has flying, and when Soul of Migration enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white bird creature tokens with flying. However, don't worry about that high 7 mana cost, because we're always going to use its evoke cost for 3 and a white. Honestly, this is one of the best cards in the deck. From one card, we will get 3 bodies, and we will always want to be using that reduced evoke cost, since the Soul of Migration will then immediately sacrifice itself, meaning we will immediately get an important death trigger and a free +1 counter. Speaking of, what are we going to be doing with all those +1 counters? First off, we have +1 counter synergies, such as Anok Bondkin and Hagra Constrictor. Anok Bondkin is a 2/1 dog soldier for 1 and a white that has Outlast for 1 and a white, and also has each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has First Strike. Hagra Constrictor is an 0/0 snake for 2 and a black that enters the battlefield with 2 +1 counters on it, but more importantly, each creature you control with a +1 counter on it has Menace. Also, we can use these +1 counters as fuel for other effects, like Shinewend, an 0/0 elemental for 1 and a white that has flying, and it comes into play with a +1 counter, and pay 1 and a white, remove a +1 counter from Shinewend, destroy target enchantment. So by fueling this with a continuous stream of +1 counters, we can consistently remove our opponent's most important enchantments, potentially destroying their whole strategy. Similarly, Fester Creep is an 0/0 elemental for 1 and a black that enters the battlefield with a +1 counter on it, and has pay 1 and a black and remove a +1 counter from Fester Creep. All other creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. So Fester Creep is a particularly good find for this deck, because remember, while our commander does care about flying creatures dying, it doesn't actually care where the +1 counter goes, so we can put more and more +1 counters on Fester Creep even though it doesn't have flying. And we can then use it as a flexible board wipe. Even better, if it kills some of our small creatures, we can then use those deaths to place more +1 counters on our growing threats, or even back onto Fester Creep. In addition, we've got creatures that can grow independently of our commander's ability, with Guardian Kirin and Selimgar Scavenger. Both of these have very similar effects, Guardian Kirin being a 2/3 Kirin for 3 and a white with flying, and whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1 counter on Guardian Kirin. Selimgar Scavenger is a 2/3 zombie bird for 4 and a black that has flying, and whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1 counter on Selimgar Scavenger. In addition, if we exploit a creature and sacrifice another creature, we can give Selimgar Scavenger haste until end of turn, and also have it come in jump-started with a +1 counter off the bat. But in addition to these 2 creatures, we can give this +1 counters on Death's trigger to any creature we control, with Sadistic Glee, an aura enchantment for a black mana that has whenever any creature is put into any graveyard from play, put a +1 counter on enchanted creature. This means that even if our deck isn't going off, we can still put this on any creature we control and it will get huge fast. Because in any game, particularly in multiplayer games, there are always creatures dying, and so this will always be a very powerful card. But apart from +1 counter effects, we can use Falkenrath Noble, a 2/2 vampire for 3 and a black that has flying, and whenever Falkenrath Noble or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is going to be a powerful payoff for all of our creatures dying, and we can use this to drain out our opponents. While we can also use Ward-Eye Witch for card selection, a 3/2 Goblin Enchantment for 2 and a black that has whenever Ward-Eye Witch or another creature you control dies, scry 1. With all the creatures that we will have dying constantly, we will be able to really set up the top card of our library for exactly what we want it to be when we need it. But outside of combat, what will our creatures be dying to? Well, we are in black, so the answer is everything. We have a whole bunch of cards that will sacrifice our creatures to gain additional effects, like powerful one-shot draw cards, like Deadly Dispute, an instant for 1 and a black that we can sacrifice a creature to draw to and create a treasure token. We can do this more consistently with Spark Reaper, a 2/3 zombie for 2 and a black that has pay 3 mana, sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and we gain a life and draw a card. We can also use our creatures for removal using Bone Shards, a sorcery for a black mana that has sacrifice a creature to destroy target creature or planeswalker. Or if simply killing things isn't enough, we can use Angelic Purge, a sorcery for 2 and a white that has sacrifice a permanent to exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment. This is going to be particularly effective if our opponent has a highly recursive strategy or basically any deck that runs black. Finally, we can use our creatures as sacrifice fodder to protect our more important pieces, using enchantments like Fanatical Devotion and Dark Privilege. Fanatical Devotion is an enchantment for 2 and a white that has sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature, while Dark Privilege is an aura enchantment for 2 and a black that has enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and sacrifice a creature, regenerate enchanted creature. But with all of these sacrifice effects going around, we have to be very careful to keep up a steady supply of creatures. We're going to do that with recursion effects, some of which are stapled onto creatures like Cadaver Imp and Petadrop Rescuer. Both of these are creatures that when they enter the battlefield will allow us to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Cadaver Imp will allow us to return any creature we want, while Petadrop Rescuer is limited to creature cards with mana value 3 or less. We also have one-shot effects, such as Forever Young and Death Denied. Forever Young is a sorcery for 1 and a black that has put any number of target creature cards from our graveyard on top of our library, then draw a card. So this will allow us to get our most valuable creature back to hand immediately, while also setting up all of our future draws, however many we want. While Death Denied is an arcane instant for an X black that has return X target creature cards from your graveyard directly to your hand. This can allow us to set up for some truly explosive plays and make our board super wide, particularly in the late game. We can even make sure that we have our cake and eat it too with cards like Feign Death, an instant for a black mana that has until end of turn target creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1 counter on it. So for a single black mana, we can return a creature that would have just died, meaning we will get the death trigger, but also any ETB effects, and it even comes back jump-started with a +1 counter on it, tying into those synergies immediately. These cards will ensure that we will always have plenty of creatures on the board to sacrifice and to swing with, and to keep us going, we've got some life gain effects. We've already discussed lifelink creatures and Falkenrath Noble, but we also have Basilica Screecher, a 1/2 bat for 1 and a black that has flying and extort. So whenever we cast a spell, we can pay white or black to drain each opponent for 1 life, and we gain that much life. This will gain us a huge amount of life over the course of the game, particularly in multiplayer, and we can capitalize on our incremental life gain effects with Heron of Hope, a 2/3 bird for 3 and a white that has flying, and if you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead, and pay 1 and a white, Heron of Hope gains lifelink until end of turn. This card will effectively double up several of our life gain effects, making sure that we stay very strong even as we go deep into the late game. Speaking of, we do need to win, and we're going to do that by pushing through our opponent's defenses with our huge flyers and taking them out. Our army is already going to be flying, and that level of evasion can be very tricky for opponents who aren't set up to counter it. We can capitalize on this with Eyed Scarecrow, a 2/3 Scarecrow for 3 mana with Defender, and creatures with flying our opponent's control get -1/-0. So this is going to weaken any flyers our opponents have, making them much less effective for blocks or for attempting to swing into us. And as we swing, we can also pump our creatures with Anointer Valor, a 3/5 angel for 5 and a white that has flying, and whenever a creature attacks, you may pay 3 mana. When you do, put a +1 counter on that creature. In the late game, we will have mana to spare, and will be able to activate this card's ability multiple times, buffing multiple creatures every single combat. But just in case our opponents can keep up enough defenders, we have another piece of tech with Skyblinder's Staff, an equipment for 1 mana that has equipped creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked by creatures with flying. In this deck, this will make our creature effectively unblockable, meaning we can swing in with our largest and beefiest flyer to take out our opponents. And if even that fails, we can use Rite of Consumption, a sorcery for 1 and a black that has sacrifice a creature. Rite of Consumption deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. So this, if we sacrifice a big enough creature, can just straight up burn out an opponent out of the game, while also netting us a nice chunk of life, potentially meaning we will last long enough to win the game. And that is my Shadewing Laureate deck. It plays around with Flying Tribal, which is usually reserved for Azorius, but this has a distinctly Orzhov flavor, sacrificing creatures left and right to generate tons of value. And those +1 counters? Just icing on the cake, making us even stronger as the game goes on. This deck is going to cost us about $16.25, and check out the deck list in the description. Please like and subscribe, and come back next week when we tackle the Rakdos Guild.